The autumn sun hovered low over Bradley's auto repair, washing the small garage in a warm golden glow that made even the rusted tool chest look charming. The scent of oil, metal, and pine cleaner filled the air. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, competing with the natural light spilling through the open bay doors. Ethan Bradley wiped his hands on a worn cotton rag and stepped back from the vintage Mustang. He'd been restoring for almost a month. The engine purred now, steady, confident, like a cat curling up on a patch of sunlight. He couldn't help but smile. Cars didn't lie. When he fixed one, it stayed fixed. It never pretended to be something it wasn't. There was a kind of purity in that he found nowhere else. At 32, Ethan had the build of someone who worked with his hands every day. Strong arms, square shoulders, and calloused palms. His brown hair was mussed from the long workday, and grease smudged the sleeves of his gray shirt despite his attempts to keep clean. His overalls were tan once, now an evolving pattern of oil, sweat, and paint. But he wore them with a quiet confidence, the way some men carried tailored suits. He had bought this garage 5 years ago, using money saved from working 2 jobs and sacrificing sleep for most of his 20s. It wasn't a huge operation, just 3 other mechanics in a small office, but it was his. He didn't have much in the way of luxury, but he had stability, pride, and a job he cared about. For Ethan, that was enough. The bell above the shop door chimed. He turned, expecting a customer needing a tire rotation, or maybe Mrs. Abrams from down the street asking if he could check the noise her old minivan made when it turned left. But instead, a woman stepped inside who looked like she belonged on the cover of a fashion magazine rather than inside a dusty auto shop. Her blonde hair caught the afternoon light like silk, cascading past her shoulders with ease. She wore a cream-colored silk blouse tucked into tailored burgundy pants, and a faint scent of expensive perfume drifted in with her. Everything about her looked polished, refined, delicate even, but not fragile. She stood with an air of confidence that suggested she was used to being in control of things. Ethan blinked. She definitely did not look like someone who belonged between tire racks and hydraulic lifts. "Can I help you?" he asked, wiping his hands again out of instinct. The woman offered a polite smile. "I hope so. My car broke down about a mile from here." Her voice matched her appearance. Cool, smooth, and well-spoken, but there was a hint of frustration underneath, something very human that softened her edges. "What kind of car?" Ethan asked. "A Tesla Model S." Ethan nodded. "All right, let me grab my truck, and we'll go take a look." 20 minutes later, they stood beside her disabled Tesla on the shoulder of the highway. Cars whizzed past them in streaks of silver and noise. Ethan crouched beside the vehicle with his diagnostics tablet, while the woman, Victoria, she had introduced herself, watched with contained impatience. After a few minutes, Ethan exhaled through his nose. "Battery management systems failed," he said. "I can tow it back to my shop, but the part you need will take about 3 days to arrive." Victoria's shoulders lowered with a sigh, the first crack in her immaculate composure. "Of course it will." "I'm sorry," Ethan said, genuinely sympathetic. "If you need a loaner, I have an old Honda you can use. It's not pretty, but it works." Victoria blinked in surprise, then smiled. An honest smile this time, not the polished one from earlier. "That's very kind. Thank you." As they headed back toward the garage in Ethan's old tow truck, she asked small questions at first, about his business, the town, how long he'd been working as a mechanic. But the questions grew more personal the longer they talked. "Do you enjoy what you do?" she asked. Ethan glanced at her. "Yeah, it's hard work, and some days are long, but it's mine. That matters." "I can see that." Victoria looked around the interior of the truck as though studying the life he had built. Not many people get to say they like what they do. Ethan shrugged. Maybe they're looking for the wrong things. She went quiet, then nodded slowly, absorbing his words. Back at the garage, Ethan handed her the keys to the loaner Honda. Victoria didn't take them right away. Instead, she hesitated, her polished ease replaced by something almost nervous. "Can I ask you something unusual?" she said. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Sure." She took a breath, bracing herself. "I have a family reunion this weekend, at my parents' estate upstate. They're very traditional, and they've been pressuring me for years about not being married. Her lips pressed together in embarrassment. I know this might sound insane, but would you consider being my date for the weekend? Ethan stared at her, convinced he misheard. Your date? I would pay you, of course, Victoria added quickly. $5,000 for 2 days. You just need to attend dinners and events with me. Help me avoid the endless interrogation about my personal life. Ethan was speechless. $5,000 would cover the new hydraulic car lift he desperately needed. But this? Going to a rich family estate with a stranger? Why me? He asked, still baffled. You don't know anything about me. Victoria's eyes softened. Because you're real. Everyone in my world is so polished and perfect and fake. You're different. He didn't know what to say. Her desperation wasn't theatrical. It was genuine, and that got to him. Okay, Ethan finally said. I'll do it. Victoria's reaction was immediate, a bright, relieved smile. Really, he replied. But I don't have any clothes for fancy events. I'll take care of that, she said confidently. Victoria returned the next day with garment bags. 3 of them. Ethan pulled a perfectly tailored suit from one of the bags and felt his jaw slacken. How did you know my size? He asked. I'm good at estimating, Victoria said, her smile teasing but gentle. When Friday arrived, they drove upstate in a sleek rental car. But something shifted on that drive. Victoria was quieter, more introspective. Then, halfway through the trip, she said, I should tell you the truth. Ethan tensed slightly. About what? About who I am. She took a breath. My full name is Victoria Ashford. I'm the CEO of Ashford Industries. Ethan nearly swerved off the road. The tech company? The one with the AI security systems. Yes. You're worth, like what? $1 billion. Closer to $2 billion, actually, Victoria admitted. But who's counting? Ethan pulled over to the side of the road, completely thrown. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to agree based on who I am, not what I am. People treat me differently when they know. Ethan understood. He truly did, and he nodded slowly. Okay, but I need to know what I'm walking into. Victoria exhaled, relieved by his calm reaction. She explained everything. Her family's expectations, the pressure, the judgment, the failed engagement with a man her parents adored but who only saw her as a trophy. Her voice held both strength and exhaustion. By the time they reached the massive Ashford estate, more mansion than home, more museum than mansion, Ethan felt like he was stepping into another planet. Inside the dining hall, chandeliers sparkled, marble gleamed, and everyone looked as though they'd been sculpted rather than born. Victoria squeezed his hand under the table. Just be yourself, she whispered. That's all I need. Dinner was tense. Her father, Richard, stern and silver-haired, studied Ethan like a biology specimen. Her mother, Margaret, elegant but cold, offered tight smiles that didn't reach her eyes. So, Ethan, Richard said, what do you do? I own an auto repair shop, Ethan replied, his tone steady. Silence. The brittle kind that said everything. How quaint, Margaret murmured. Victoria's jaw tightened. She tried to defend him, but the judgment hung thick in the air. Ethan held her hand beneath the table and didn't let go. But the real confrontation came after dinner. Victoria's cousin Brandon, expensive suit, sculpted hair, ego large enough to require its own zip code, cornered them. So, Brandon sneered, you're dating to help now, Victoria? Ethan had expected snide comments, but the sheer contempt in Brandon's voice snapped something inside him. What he said next changed everything. Brandon's smirk widened when Ethan didn't immediately respond. The man stood slightly taller, using every inch of his polished superiority to loom. It was the posture of someone who had never been challenged, never been told no, and certainly never been confronted by someone outside his wealthy bubble. Ethan didn't rise to the bait, not at first. But when Brandon leaned closer, lowering his voice to a mocking whisper, everything changed. We all know you dragged him here, Brandon said. What point are you trying to make this time? Rebelling again? This, he motioned toward Ethan with distaste, is a bit dramatic. don't you think? Ethan stepped forward until their faces were inches apart. His calmness was so controlled, so precise, that even Brandon paused. "Let me tell you what's dramatic," Ethan said quietly, voice low enough to make Brandon lean in. "Treating people like they're beneath you because they work with their hands. Pretending your bank account makes you a better man. Measuring worth by money instead of character." Brandon blinked, stunned by the shift in power. "I may not have your money," Ethan said, "but I have something you don't." Brandon's jaw twitched. "And what is that?" "Self-respect." He took Victoria's hand, nodded politely, like he was leaving a boring conversation, and led her out into the garden. The cold night air hit them both, crisp and refreshing, a sharp contrast to the suffocating judgment inside. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Victoria burst out laughing. Not a polite laugh, not a forced one, a real, unrestrained, joyous laugh. That, she managed between breaths, was incredible. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "Sorry, I probably shouldn't have." "Are you kidding?" Victoria stepped closer, her eyes bright with something warm and admiring. "No one has ever defended me like that. Not once in my entire life." "You deserve better," he said simply. Her expression softened. "You really think so?" "I know so." Something shifted in the cool garden air. A connection, powerful, unmistakable, clicked into place. They walked the grounds together, the evening quiet except for the crunch of gravel beneath their shoes. The estate, for all its grandeur, felt empty and cold. But next to Ethan, Victoria felt, in a way she hadn't felt in years, safe. The next day brought the garden party, a sprawling event involving catered food, perfectly trimmed hedges, and relatives who looked like they'd stepped out a catalog for generational wealth. Ethan spotted judgmental glances from nearly every direction, but he also saw something else. Victoria stood taller. She smiled more freely. She introduced Ethan without hesitation. She stopped shrinking to fit the expectations around her. And every time he took her hand, she squeezed back like it meant everything. That evening, as they prepared for formal dinner, Victoria came to Ethan's room. She hovered in the doorway for a moment, her eyes searching his face. Then, with a breath filled with courage, she stepped inside. "I need to tell you something," she said. Ethan set down his tie. "What is it?" "This weekend." She swallowed. "It stopped being pretend for me." His heart leaped. "For me, too." Victoria moved closer until she stood only inches away. "I know we're from different worlds. And maybe this should scare me, but it doesn't. When I'm with you, I breathe. I don't have to perform. I don't have to be perfect. I feel like I'm enough." Ethan touched her cheek gently. "You're more than enough." Their kiss was soft, warm, and real. Not part of the deal. Not pretend. Not an escape. A beginning. At dinner that night, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Some relatives whispered behind napkins. Others stared outright. Victoria noticed, but for the first time in years, she didn't shrink from it. Partway through the meal, she stood. Forks clinked. Murmurs died down. All eyes turned toward her. "I have an announcement," she said. Ethan felt the air shift. "Ethan and I are together," Victoria continued. "And before anyone objects, I'd like to say something." Her parents stiffened. Several relatives exchanged glances. "I've spent my whole life trying to meet your expectations," she said. "I built a company. I made billions. I tried to be everything you asked me to be, but none of it mattered because I wasn't married to the right person." The room remained silent. "Well," she went on, voice stronger now, "I'm done caring about that. Ethan treats me with more respect in a single conversation than most men in our circle show in a lifetime. He values hard work. He values integrity. He makes me laugh. And he makes me happy." She took Ethan's hand. "And if that isn't good enough for this family, then maybe this family isn't good enough for me." A wave of shock spread across the table. Her mother's lips parted, speechless. Her father opened his mouth, but no words emerged. A few cousins muttered. Brandon looked ready to explode. But then, at the far end of the table, a chair scraped across the marble floor. Victoria's grandmother, 92 years old, frail-looking but sharp as a knife, stood. "Sit down, all of you," she commanded. The authority in her voice was so absolute that everyone obeyed without hesitation. She walked slowly toward Victoria and Ethan. When she reached Ethan, she extended her wrinkled hand. "Let me see your hands, young man." Ethan held them out. She studied the calluses, the scars, the worn skin shaped by years of honest labor. Her eyes softened. "These," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "are honest hands. Hands at work. Hands that build." She turned to the family. "My husband had hands like these. He was a carpenter before he made his fortune. We have forgotten where we came from." She faced Victoria again. "If this man makes you happy, then you have my blessing." Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she hugged her grandmother, and something in the room shifted. A few relatives softened. Others still scowled. But none dared challenge the grandmother. Later that night, after the guests dispersed, Ethan and Victoria walked the estate grounds again. "What you did was brave," Ethan said, standing up to them. Victoria smiled. "I learned it from you." "What do you mean?" "You weren't afraid to be yourself. Even when everyone judged you, you stayed grounded. You showed me that being real is more important than being approved of." She stopped walking. "I don't want this weekend to end." "It doesn't have to," Ethan said. 6 months later, the world looked very different. Victoria stepped down as CEO. She remained chairwoman of the board, but hired someone else to manage daily operations. She moved to Ethan's small town, by a modest house walking distance from a garage. She started a foundation to help young entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds. Ethan expanded his garage with the money he'd saved and some funds Victoria insisted on loaning him, never giving outright because she respected his pride. He hired more staff, invested in better equipment, and spent more time working on the cars he loved rather than drowning in paperwork. Their lives didn't merge perfectly. They merged honestly. Arguments happened. Adjustments happened. But beneath all of it was a shared truth. They chose each other, not because it made sense, not because it impressed anyone, not because it fit expectations, but because it was real. A year later, they married, not at the Ashford estate, not in a ballroom, but in Ethan's garage, the place where everything had started, surrounded by friends, mechanics, neighbors, and the family members who genuinely supported them. Victoria's grandmother sat front row, wrapped in a lavender shawl, eyes filled with pride. During the reception, she stood and raised her glass. "Real love," she said, voice firm despite her age, "does not ask you to be something you are not. It celebrates who you are." Victoria turned to Ethan, her expression glowing with gratitude and affection. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me." Ethan took her hands. "Thank you," he replied, "for choosing what's real." Sometimes the best relationships start as pretending. Sometimes a broken-down car becomes the beginning of something extraordinary. And sometimes a person from a completely different world turns out to be the one you were meant to find.